I was chatting with a friend of mine, Mary, this week, and we were swapping stories about how much we appreciated the togetherness of worship after the isolation of COVID. Mary had particularly felt this gratitude over the May holiday weekend when she'd been able to take part in her community's Croatian festival, which included a packed to the rafters service celebrating Mass. At one point, a hymn was being sung by choirs and the congregation, accompanied by musicians, and it had been so compelling for Mary that she had taken out her phone and recorded it. And so she showed me. It was incredible to watch. Because it was the festival weekend, much of the congregation was in traditional Croatian costume. And it was fascinating to see such a vibrant yet visibly different congregation at worship. And then I started to hear the audio. And I suddenly realized, I know that song. I couldn't make out the words. I wasn't even sure if it was being sung in English. And so the moment overwhelmed me with its connection to our reading, through the way in which it was at once completely foreign and yet also deeply familiar. And the hymn was familiar to me because we sing it here. The hymn was "Here I Am, Lord," also titled "I, the Lord of Sea and Sky." And it's a wonderful affirmation of faith amidst uncertainty, which is also very fitting for our reading today. We are used to seeing this passage with celebratory eyes as the beginning of Christianity and the apostolic mission. But to give that celebration its fullest context, we need to look first at the extent to which this world and this moment were permeated with uncertainty. First of all, there are the disciples who were apprehensive and tentative. They have seen the risen Christ, and he has instructed them to wait in Jerusalem to receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon them. It was the last thing Jesus said to them. So they wait and wonder, what comes next? Then there is the wider community, made up of people who have been moved, literally, through uncertainty. Acts describes the devout Jews from every people under heaven and provides a very lengthy, complicated, sorry Susan, list of regions and languages represented in the community in Jerusalem. These were people whose families had previously been scattered out of Israel and who had generations later returned to Jerusalem. Their families have lived through the uncertainty of experiences such as exile, enslavement, or economic hardship. And now they have moved again, back to their homeland perhaps, but still identified as foreign and different. And then, the first reaction to the Holy Spirit that we read of in Acts is one of uncertainty and even fear. The coming of the Spirit was so loud, so violent, that a crowd quickly gathered. Our text says they were bewildered. But if this makes us imagine quiet confusion, then we are downplaying the event. Instead, picture a crowd in turmoil, stirred up in a disorderly uproar and completely uncomprehending. That brings us closer to the unsettling uncertainty of this moment. Unsettling uncertainty is hard to live with, as we've all experienced, especially over the last few years. On a personal front, my workplace has been steeped in uncertainty over the last 6 months. I remember the day when this uncertainty crashed into my world. I was downtown going to work and had just stepped into the elevator in our building. Now, the office is on the 42nd floor, so I have plenty of time to read the news headlines that the elevator's monitors display. But the news that morning was not pleasant reading. For there was the name of the company I worked with, linked to widespread layoffs that would be announced in the coming months. That uncertainty hung over my team and our colleagues for the next 3 months, only to be replaced by the uncertainty of a regional restructuring with unknown roles, unknown teams, and the fear of further reductions, now unsettling our days and disturbing our nights. I can see in others and feel in myself the tangible pain of an uncertain future. As the apostles were to discover, faith does not eliminate such challenging times, but it can transform them. And more importantly, it transforms us. And that is what we affirm when we remember the day of Pentecost. We celebrate the triumph of God's power over fear and uncertainty, and we proclaim the courage we can have through God. We can see this courage at work throughout our reading. The most obvious example is a transformed Peter. The fear and uncertainty that had him vigorously deny Jesus before the crucifixion, and which at the end of John's Gospel had Peter doubt Jesus' love. All that is gone. Now Peter speaks boldly to the crowd, preaching the power of God and the salvation of Jesus. More than Peter, though, the entirety of the believers are clearly and explicitly included in this transformation. The Spirit came to all of them. The vivid imagery of tongues of fire rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit. And we can see in the book of Acts and beyond the impact of this moment as they go on to carry out the ministry of Jesus, courageous in the face of hardship and repudiation. Powerfully, this transformation is shared inclusively, with no one left out. In his speech, Peter even names the diversity of the recipients of the Spirit, men and women, old and young, free and enslaved. His speech here suggests the probable diversity of the believers who were present that day and received the Spirit. The legacy of Jesus' teaching and ministry was disrupting social constructs of power and division. And it emphasizes God's intention to include everyone in his blessing of the Spirit, everyone in his blessing of salvation, everyone in his blessing of courage. what might we do with courage through God? How can courage through God transform our uncertainty? I was inspired this week reading the story of Dr. Terere Trent, who grew up in a cattle herding family in rural Zimbabwe. For Terere, like her mother, grandmother, and generations of women before her, her life was shaped by fear and abuse. She, like them, was sold into marriage, literally sold in exchange for a cow at the age of 11. By 18, Terere already had 3 children, but she also had a dream of a very different life. Despite not even having a high school education, Terere dreamed of university study and ultimately completing a PhD. There isn't the time to properly relate the challenges Terere has overcome in her life. The abuse she suffered in her home from her husband who beat her. The poverty she had to overcome to feed her family as well as progress her education. The difficulties Terere has faced are almost incomprehensible. But Terere describes her journey filled with grit and perseverance and courage in a very profound way. She writes, "At the most difficult points in my life, I had superhuman strength because of other people who gave me opportunity." Because of other people. Because of the university official who believed in her potential and intervened when Terere couldn't pay her fees. Because of his church community who helped with food. Because of the charity Habitat for Humanity who provided housing. Because God sent other people who gave her opportunity. Because the collective and inclusive blessing of the Holy Spirit is the promise of God's power at work in the world, giving us courage, transforming our uncertainty. The collective and inclusive blessing of the Holy Spirit drives Terere on, and she describes her work now as a sacred and moral responsibility. Her mission to build schools and provide education for others is Terere's ultimate dream, based on her mother's belief that a person's purpose should be connected to the betterment of others and connected to her own compulsion to pay forward the opportunities that others gave her. Terere says, "It's an ancient, sacred responsibility that I'm following to allow others to stand on my shoulder. If we live in this world where we all do that, we recognize that there are others who are struggling. And what is our role? How is my dream connected to the struggle of others?" The answer for Terere is to ask yourself this fundamental question: what breaks my heart? And when we have the answer to this question, we can find our courage by trusting in the power of God's love. We can sing the words of the hymn, "Here I am, Lord," and proclaim, "I will go, Lord, if you lead me. I will hold your people in my heart." Pentecost, challenges and inspires us to affirm that God's power will give us courage, that the Holy Spirit within us can help us reach out to others. And at the same time, Pentecost reassures us that when our world is a storm of uncertainty, God's Spirit sends others to give us opportunity. We share the opportunity to trust, the opportunity to hope, the opportunity to care. Above all, we share the opportunity to love, to let God's love touch our hearts and change our lives. That is the promise of Pentecost. Praise be to God.